Afternoon. I'm going to call this meeting to order. It's the City of Hardyville City Council Workshop. Council Chambers, 205 Main Street, Hardyville, South Carolina, 29927, Monday, May 12th, 2025 at 2 p.m. This is a workshop. The rules of order will be relaxed. Just remind everybody, make sure that the previous speaker has released the floor, and then you can hop right in. We're going to talk about the capital improvement plan today, so I'm going to turn this right over to Mr. Gruber and Mr. Boyle.
We want to thank everybody for being here, and we appreciate the diligence not only that council's putting into this, but long before then, our department heads. So we'll just jump right in. First thing you see is we had a schedule that had a whole bunch of boxes we wanted to check. And here we are, we're checking the fourth from the bottom. Workshop 3, talk about the capital. This is the same slide as previously presented. See the general fund, all in, we had 75,900,000. That number changed a little bit with one of the decisions that was made at the last meeting. You see the proposed millage is 95 for Jasper County and 100.9 for Beaufort County property, City of Hardyville property in those two counties. You see the budgeted expenses by the purpose, and then you see where we're going to spend our time today. You see the recommended capital projects of about just under $21 million, almost 6 for facilities, 5.3 for roadways, 4.6 for parks, infrastructure 2.5 million, and then various equipment for 2,192,000. So our objectives today are pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We want to talk about the capital budget. We want to review council's priority list. We want to review or provide the opportunity to review and discuss all of the requests that department has made. And we have, what the city manager was able to recommend is less than 20% of what was requested. And then a lot of that has to do with these funding and financing limitations. Once we wrap up the capital discussion, we have the opportunity, should council desire, go back and bang through some of what we talked about at the operating budget update last week this time, and then whatever else council would like to talk about.
So I talked last time about how I believe that our budget should go hand in glove with our strategic plan, and our strategic plan should be reflective of those things that we are funding within the budget. And so to that extent, a lot of what you see today in terms of our capital improvement projects that we are proposing are those that are both, one, in line with our strategic plan. So we wanted to kind of remind everybody that the projects that are identified in the bullet points here are those projects that you had identified as being your highest priorities for what you wanted the city to pursue in terms of capital project development. And so this list is really what is guiding a lot of what we're doing, but you're going to see that our CIP list is also broader than this. This just happens to be the priorities that we are trying to accomplish. And so what we're going to go over today is I'm going to highlight how we have either incorporated or not incorporated these projects into the proposed budget as part of our plan, not only for this year, but for hopefully the next 5 years as part of our CIP scheduling. And so we'll go to the next slide here. No, I got it. Thank you. So what we are proposing, all of the projects that are all within your priority list that we can identify a source of funding that will be sufficient to allow this project to move forward, then we are recommending to you that it be pursued. However, a number of projects are so significant in terms of their cost that currently we do not have a sufficient source of revenue that would allow us to pay for them. And we're going to go over some scenarios where we've kind of worked out the numbers that if we wanted to go forward with every project that is on this list, ultimately to accomplish that, roughly about $50 million. And so when we look at what the value of our mill is, which is about $140,000 per mill, we've worked out what it would ultimately cost us if we wanted to borrow the money to allow all of these projects to move forward today. And the analysis of that is it would be somewhere between 18 to 20 mills that we would have to add to the tax bill in order to generate enough revenue on an annual basis to pay the debt service. Obviously, that's something that's not realistic, nor is it practical, because something like that from a public standpoint would just be very, very difficult to take in. So we're going to cover those projects that we think we have sufficient funding for. We're going to cover those projects that we don't believe we have sufficient funding for. And at the end of the day, I'm recommending to you that you consider adopting a budget that remains neutral in terms of millage, only because it allows us the opportunity as we move forward to use budget discipline to set aside dedicated funding for capital projects that we would not touch. We would not use it for other expenses. We would allow that pot of money to start growing so that after 3, 4, 5 years, we will have contributed enough to it so that we would not only have some cash on hand, but more importantly, we would have a revenue stream of recurring millage revenue that we could use to pay the debt service to pursue some of these more expensive projects. So let's kind of dive into that. So this first series of spreadsheets that you see here on pages 7 and 8, these are the CIP projects that were requested by staff. I always want you to have access to the information of what staff has submitted to me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about it. But I'm not planning on spending a lot of time on this today because what they've submitted versus what I've requested are not necessarily the exact same thing. So I want you to have access to this information, ask any questions you may have about it or any of the projects that are listed in there, but really just wanted to focus on the CIP projects that I am recommending to you as part of the budget that was formally submitted. And so using those prioritized projects as a go-by, I'm going to kind of highlight how we either have or have not incorporated those projects into this budget. So I'm going to kind of start up here. I'm going to skip over this first one, the municipal hub. I'm going to come back to it in just a second, but I'm going to skip it for right now. So the first one, City Hall expansion. You can see I have not recommended anything for this year, ultimately, because the anticipated cost that we have right now and the placeholder that we have is a little bit in excess of $10 million. The reality is we would not have sufficient revenues to pay for the construction of that facility a couple of years from now. And so I'm not recommending that we spend any money on doing the geotechnical analysis, the design work, because until we know that it's a viable project we can move forward with, I don't think it's prudent to take our existing limited resources and put it towards a project that we don't know when or if it's going to come forward for full funding from this body. So we have it in here, we are tracking it, but it's not something that we can currently recommend at this point in time. And so I want you to be aware that while it's one of your prioritized projects, it's not something that I'm recommending for funding because I don't know how we pay for the construction costs associated with this particular project. In addition to that, we've got 102 Main Street right here. So that is identified for funding. All in, we think it's going to be about $688,000 to renovate both the home itself, inside, outside, redo the site a little bit, relocate the driveway away from the residential structure and in between the two existing city-owned buildings, as well as a renovation of the detached garage space that goes with this structure as well. And I think I've talked to a couple of you with working with the Jasper Chamber and the Visitor Center. I think that that could be a great future home of the Hardyville City Library, not library, City Museum, where we have a lot of our historical artifacts and things from the past that we could put into that space, along with offering the chamber that space for use as a visitor center. A couple of parking spaces out back underneath that gorgeous live oak tree, to me, is a really great opportunity to say if we wanted to have people from outside this community visit the city to learn about us for the first time, that would be a place that if we can renovate that structure, put all that history in there along with their staff, that to me becomes a really quality visitor center that puts our best foot forward in terms of letting people come learn more about us and who we are. So we have that on tap for this year. Upon approval of the budget, assuming that this project stays in there, we're going to go rocking and rolling. We've got staff that are teeing that up. They've already done surveys of the trees that are on site. Jody's been working on developing some of the redevelopment plans of the structure itself. And so with the budget approval, we will move forward on that very rapidly. So I also want to focus on the new Hardyville PD HQ. That was one of the projects that was identified as one of the highest priorities coming out of our strategic plan workshop. And as you can see, the number that we're currently associating with it based upon the space needs analysis that was performed, we're estimating would cost us about $18.5 million to move forward with. And it's for that reason, because of that significant cost, that I'm not recommending that we move forward with it today. Again, because at this current point in time, we don't have a recurring source of revenue that I believe we could use to pay for the cost of that facility. So again, it's on the list. We are tracking it, but until we find a sufficient source of future revenues to move forward with it, I'm not recommending that we invest in further site development until such time as we know it can become a viable project. One that we are moving forward with is Station 82. I would say, knowing what I know today, this probably should be our highest priority in terms of capital projects. And the reason for that is the existing space that we are leasing has a finite time period for which we can occupy it. Now, we could always pursue discussions of an extension, but those are never guaranteed. And for me, planning on a worst case scenario, which is we don't have an extension and we don't have a new facility to go to, means we now have a fire department without a home. And so I'm not sure how ISO or other similar bodies would treat that, but I don't think it would be very kind to us, nor would the residents be very understanding. So from that standpoint, because of the timing concerns, it's my opinion that this needs to be our highest priority in terms of capital projects, because we are under a deadline to have a solution figured out to this situation. You can see here that we are proposing to move full bore on it. We had some existing funds in this year's capital budget, and then the remaining funds we are looking at pulling from a couple of different sources. One, we've got $1.3 million in use of fund balance, and then $2 million from land acquisition. So I think I mentioned when we were talking about our operating budget and I was talking about the land acquisition account, we currently have a little over $3 million in that particular account. I don't want to say a majority of that revenue, but the reason that we have $3 million in that account is because we sold the existing Fire Station 82 property. And then we also sold some land that was donated to us up along Perrysburg Road. So the contribution of both of those, about $1.5 million from the current fire station facility and about $600,000 from the sale of the property that was donated to us up on Perrysburg Road, is what makes up that $2 million. So essentially, we're basically proposing to take the money from the sale of property that went to public safety and invest it back in public safety by using it to help construct this particular facility. There was discussion about whether or not we should keep those funds on hand in the land acquisition account and borrow that money rather than paying the cash that we have. And that way, if another land acquisition opportunity were to come up, we would have funds that we could draw upon to pursue that. That is a policy decision for you all. We can make either option work for us. This is just the recommendation that we're bringing forward for you to consider. But at the end of the day, this is a project that we cannot delay and we must move forward with in order to avoid that kind of worst case scenario.
Will you
Yes, please.
talk about us borrowing?
Mm-hmm.
What is our capacity to borrow?
Sure. So that is something that I think we can provide to you. I don't know if, John, if you know it off the top of your head, from a formula standpoint, the state statutes allow local governments to borrow 8% of the total assessed value of all property that is located within the municipal boundaries. So that's information that is maintained by Jasper County, that we can ask them what is the current assessed value for all the properties that are within the municipal limits. You take that figure, you multiply it by 8%, and that tells you what your debt ceiling is. Now, that is debt that this body can just borrow by adopting an ordinance. You do not have to go to the public. You do not have to do a referendum. That is just the ceiling that the statute allows you to borrow to. There are also a handful of identified exceptions to that. For example, if we were to get hit by a natural disaster, named storm or something along those lines, and we needed to borrow more in order to recover, that is an exception where we do not have to go out to the public. We do not have to have a referendum. If we can show that we're borrowing funds for that allowed use, we can borrow in excess of that 8%. Now, I'll tell you, in looking at our current debt structure, we are probably nowhere near the actual capacity limit that we have under that calculation. This body has for many years been very, very conservative when it comes to borrowing. So we have done borrowings, but they have been fairly small in terms of dollar values, not typically exceeding $1 million or thereabouts in any given year. So we can get you that number.
I understand the process, but
Mhm.
I think we need to know in terms of making decisions, of debt issues, how much do we have?
Yes, sir. We can get you that figure.
For ongoing purposes,
Mhm.
that's gonna be necessary.
Right, and that's only gonna be for general obligation debt.
Correct.
It only applies to, that's backed by the full faith and credit of the city. You have other types of debt you can take that don't go against the full faith and credit of the city.
There's general obligation, and then there's, what's the other one?
Revenue bond?
Yep, revenue bond. So your debt for the recreation center is a revenue bond in that it's not necessarily backed by the full faith and credit, it's backed by the accommodations and hospitality taxes that the city generates to pay that debt.
And we use that to,
Correct.
Just for general information, because we are being,
Mhm.
we are not talking about borrowing money, we're just assessing the information necessary
That's it.
to know where we're at.
So in the budget that I'm proposing, there is a little bit of borrowing, but it is very much in line with the borrowing that we have done every year for the past several years. The bulk of that is typically vehicles and equipment. And so as we purchase 4 or 5 vehicles and a piece of equipment for public works or something like that, that's where the debt service has typically been around $1 million. But we don't break out millage separately from that. We just roll that into our overall budget and pay for those expenses out of the revenues that we get. And the reason why I kind of provide that clarification is there are a couple of projects, both within the CIP list and then some of the projects that we're looking at where we are going to discuss potentially doing borrowing on a very small scale as compared to some of the borrowing that we're talking about here, which is in the tens of millions of dollars.
Just clarification.
Yep.
We're not talking that today.
No, that is not today. That's the big point today is because we know these costs are so significant and they're only going to continue to get more expensive over time. I would like to, at the end of our discussion today, talk about how can we start formulating a plan, not for now, but working towards being in a position where we can ultimately pursue some of these more expensive projects, but without having to go to the public to say, hey, we're going to raise your millage by 10 mils, and because that's, again, not realistic. But theoretically, if we can take 2 mils per year or the equivalent dollar value thereof, because the mill value is going to go up every year. But if we can set aside 2 mills every year for the next 5 years into a capital project fund, at the end of that 5 years, that 10 mills would give us a really good opportunity to go out and do a large borrowing for a new city hall, for the PD headquarters, or something along those lines, and then be able to pay for that without having to go back to the public and say, hey, we've got to raise millage. Well, my thought is we've got to start somewhere. And so if we start this year with a plan of setting aside that as a goal, and again, we'll have to look at our incoming revenues, because if we hit a recession, or if there's a pullback or retraction in the real estate market or the economy, there's a number of things which could prevent us from being able to do that. But if not, the plan is, as we continue to grow, we've got to find a way to start saving a little bit specifically for capital projects. Yep, go ahead, John.
Roughly 8 million for the 8% limit.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's,
So I mentioned I was going to go back to the municipal hub. We do not have this broken out, but one of the component pieces of the municipal hub was Memorial Park. So that aspect is something that we are moving forward with currently. And we're looking at bringing it before you next month during one of your regular meetings. We've put out an RFP. We've received multiple bids from vendors. We've had a team of staff members reviewing that, ranking them, and we're going to bring to you a proposal to move forward with the project that would allow for the installation of the Memorial Park. We would look at paying for it out of an existing combination of CIP funds that we are not moving forward with this year, and then a borrowing of up to $2 million that we can either do on a short-term basis to then look at rolling that debt into a larger project in the future, or we can just go ahead and put something in place now and do a 20-year borrowing for that project and then build the millage necessary to pay for that into our operating budget for future budget years. But just know the reason why I wanted to talk about that one separately is we're going to be bringing that to you as a project here in the next couple of weeks for your consideration.
just for some information, if we proceed ahead with that project at the cost that we're talking, do we have H-tax, A-tax funds to help offset the debt that we would incur on the borrowing? I'm asking
Yep.
is what other revenue sources are available to pay that debt?
So in looking at what we're proposing this year, a lot of our A-tax and H-tax revenues are going to support our Parks and Recreation Department projects. So on that second page here on the back, you'll see that a number of these projects, so the Juju Hudson, Richard Gray Complex parking, the rec center parking lot, the basketball side paths, and then the splash pad are all projects that we are proposing to fund as part of this upcoming budget. And you'll see that a majority of those funds are either coming from DA fees or from the use of H-tax and A-tax revenues. And I know when we met last week, Mr. Mearsman, so you may not have seen this unless you went back through the materials or watched the videos, but we did talk about how this particular capital budget proposal is going to draw down our balance in both the A-tax and H-tax accounts. So our revenues have remained fairly steady, and over the last several years, we have built up a fairly healthy reserve, and now we are proposing to use a significant portion of those funds to pay for these park projects.
So like, as we move forward with this though, will we be able to basically say, dedicate an amount of funds from those two towards the debt?
For Memorial Park? Yes, that is something that as we figure out future debt service payments, we could look at paying those from those revenues.
When you bring this to the council next month, I'd like to see some type of proposal on that. Moving ahead, the park is very important to me and the council and to everybody. But we also have to be prudent and look at possible ways to pay for this. And if we have the opportunity to use the H-tax or the A-tax, we should we should take that. I understand the use of the funds. Right now, we've already committed to these, but we have to plan for the future.
Absolutely. Yep. We will have, at least with what I'm proposing, we will have about $1.2 million of cash on hand to get that project started. And then the $2 million borrowing, we would put it place in some point in time as the project moves forward with an eye towards building it into next year's budget for formal repayment.
Okay, thank you.
So right now, I do not see a separate line item for the Memorial Park.
Yes, and so the reason for that is the $2 million that we are looking to borrow was approved in this current FY25 CIP budget. So because we're authorizing to sign the contract prior to the end of June 30th, we're relying upon that schedule and not this one.
Okay.
So I've kind of covered all of the priority projects, but within this list of what we are proposing, either what was asked for or what I'm recommending, do you have any questions or would you like any additional information about any of these particular projects, pieces of equipment, or anything else with this schedule?
Have we jumped over into, Public Works, Parks?
We certainly can, absolutely.
Please.
So in Public Works, we've got these projects up here. So starting off with 2 drainage improvement projects. At this point in time, from a timing standpoint, I don't believe that we need to move forward with those today, but we do have it on our radar at some point in time to pursue. And so if we move forward with forming a stormwater utility, these are 2 projects that would get rolled into the CIP budget of the stormwater utility. But again, if you want some more information on that, we can certainly talk about it more, or provide you some more details about the location or what the scope of the projects entail. What I am recommending out of this is the purchase of equipment, so a backhoe. I believe when we did the Pine Arbor Road improvements, I think we may have had to borrow a piece of or rent a piece of machinery for that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carla, but I don't remember specifically, but I know that the intention behind this purpose is to give us more in-house capabilities of pursuing that kind of work without having to rent the equipment.
Absolutely.
So it's a significant expense. It's $161,000, but we'll be able to make use of that. And given the likelihood of using it, it outweighs having to go back and continually renting that type of equipment.
Plus you have 12 months rather than 8.5 or whatever.
That's it. Yep, very much so. Very much so.
When you need a piece of equipment like that, you need it now. You don't need to be trying to rent it. Everybody else, and if we had a hurricane, everybody else and their brother's gonna be trying to rent the same stuff.
That's it. So I think it's good for us to continue to add to our inventory of equipment, because when we do go live with the utility, we will need to add more equipment, more staff. And so this is already kind of starting us in that direction. Also proposing, so when we came to you about the parking lot paving projects, the work back here at the park, the works at the rec center, those are all ongoing. We're working with APAC to complete those. I know the Boyd Street sidewalk just recently was completed. So it is making progress, but one of the projects we were not able to move forward with was paving of the Public Works parking lot. And so in looking at our available resources, I am recommending that we do move forward with that because of the future use of that facility and how that investment will ultimately allow for a better use of this facility than what we're experiencing today. So if there are any questions about that, happy to talk about that one, but it is one of the projects I'm recommending and using funds out of the general fund to pay for it.
I think if you don't do it, it's going to be a deterrent for usage and become an issue.
Yep. Between Public Works being there themselves and having the training schools there with welding, the truck drivers and other things, we just think that the site needs to be improved and to allow it to function better than what it currently does.
I think you're absolutely right.
Anyone else?
Yep.
No, it's good.
Any other questions about Public Works or any of the the only other one that we haven't touched on there real quick is just a new vehicle. That is for the new position, Assistant Public Works Director, that we talked about in the operating budget. And so that's a vehicle that would go to support that position.
I have a couple questions.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I know this has been mentioned a number of times about the ISO ratings. And I read today one of the local municipalities went down to a 1. We're at a 2. How often are they, is that evaluated by whoever ISO is?
Anywhere
Every 2 years?
5 years.
Oh, 3 and 5 years. Okay.
Try for 3, but there's no
Yep.
backed up. It's generally closer to 5.
I will tell you, getting a 1 is difficult. It can be done, but it typically requires a substantial amount of expenses and investments in order to achieve it. And so just coming from Hilton Head, who was, again, very proactive in trying to keep those rates down, I'm not sure that we were a 1 on Hilton Head. I believe we were a 2. Yeah.
Someone, I don't know, it might have been bluffed.
That's it. It is possible, but I will tell you, it would likely take some significant investments. And Steve, I don't know if that's any information you've got readily at hand or.
It would take a significant investment.
Yeah.
Get your firehouses no more than 5 miles apart from each other, and we are at about quite a bit more than that.
Yeah. If you want some more analysis about what that would actually take, we can put together kind of a summary for you.
My next question related to that is, when was the last time we were evaluated?
2 years ago, 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. So probably the next year we'll probably go through that again.
3 years from now. The only reason I ask that, because sometimes, you hear, well, we gotta do this right away, or our ISO rating is gonna go down. Well, it doesn't happen overnight that the ISO ratings get evaluated. So I just wanted to make that observation. The other question that I have, and going back to the reason why I asked how much do we have left to borrow? I believe personally that future projects that benefit the future should be paid for in part by the future, okay? And when I see that we're only $882,000 is only 10% of our borrowing capacity, I question, there's a number of projects here that will benefit the future, and we have $3 million put onto today's resident. The general fund, $3 million. So my question is, and maybe to the council, should we not be looking to shift some of these big projects to, have the future pay for it? Give you an example. EOC improvements in Station 83. That's only $500,000, way below our capacity to borrow. This is something that's going to be used long into the future. And I don't know what the EOC improvements are, but, we just did the Hargrave building a couple years ago. So, but that's beside the point. So my thought is, general question, should we be shifting some of these big projects that are long-term projects to debt issuance rather than coming out of, or at least in part, of general fund? 102 Main Street, which we all want to do, and that could add to the capacity for our staff. But, that's going to last a long time, and we're taking almost $700,000 out of our general fund. Should some of that go to debt issuance? And these are just questions I'm going to throw out for us all to think about. And the other thing about debt issuance just kills me. More than half is going to buy a car that's going to wear out. I have looked, since I got here, I'm concerned, or It kills me that we spend so much money on new cars. We have cars all over the place. We have, and as I've said to you a couple of times, can we cut down the cost of these cars by going to smaller vehicles with hybrids as opposed to everybody's got an SUV and we have Mike's old car. That's, I know firsthand, that doesn't get down a block without having to refill it. So I'm uncomfortable using so much of our debt for cars that long before this debt's done, those cars are gonna be obsolete. That just,
So there's a couple different ways that we can go about doing that. If you felt more comfortable with borrowing for some of the structures that we're looking at doing in here, and then using, so for example, the 102 Main Street, borrowing the funds to pay for that and putting a 20-year note on repaying those funds, we could then free up funding in the general fund to just pay cash for the vehicles. So from that standpoint, we can move funds around to make it more palatable if that's the case. Now, when it comes to just looking at the acquisition of vehicles themselves, one, we've outlined all the different vehicles that we're looking to replace specifically. We use staff in our fleet management area to evaluate the useful life on those vehicles. As you can imagine, some of our vehicles, particularly police cruisers, some of our specialty vehicles and fire, and other things like that, they're used very heavily. Fast acceleration, hard braking, they're used, I don't want to say roughly, but just the nature of their work causes them to deteriorate at a relatively quick pace. So a lot of times we'll get up to 120, 130,000 miles on these vehicles, and they'll be about 5 or 7 years old, and it'll be time to replace them because mechanically there's some kind of issue going on or something where it's no longer cost advantageous to us to repair them as compared to replacing them. So know that we do that evaluation on all of them before we recommend surplusing them and then replacing them with something else. We look at, can we get more life out of them before having to go in that direction? So typically the ones that we're replacing are the ones that there's just no more life left to squeeze out of them. In addition to that, I've talked with staff about how we are going to look at the functions of the position or the functions of the use of that vehicle and let that drive the characteristics of it rather than just buying a truck every time that we need a new vehicle for our fleet. So to that extent, if we have a position that does not need to go out in the field, just needs to get back and forth between buildings, a hybrid compact car would be absolutely appropriate because the details of what that position needs is just transportation to and from. But if you're out in the field or out in an area that's not serviced by paved roads or other things like that, now you start getting into the area of needing four-wheel drive or needing an SUV or a truck that you can carry equipment and things out into the field with you. So again, that is part of our analysis as well, that if we're going to make a recommendation about purchasing a vehicle, that vehicle is going to be tailored to the use and will be the most cost-effective option for us in terms of meeting that need. Yes, sir.
That was exactly what I was thinking, what you've been saying, the profiling of use and the kind of car, like the hybrid versus the police cars. We understand that's a different kind of thing, but I think that kind of analysis is very important in mileage and all those things. It takes a little work, but I think in the long run, you're going to get a much better profiling and usage and cost.
I was grateful to Jody. She worked with a number of vendors who are either on state contract or supplying government vehicles across all the different brands. So we know Ford, we know GMC, Toyota. We're looking at what is the best and most economical option to meet our need, and that's what's driving it. Now, I'll tell you, the specialty vehicles become difficult because when you need a police cruiser, we are looking at a relatively limited number of vehicles to choose between. And so those we're not doing a whole lot with, but outside of that, be it public works, be it shared services, any of the other departments that are not public safety related, we are very much looking at what is the cheapest vehicle that we can put into the fleet to meet the need. And otherwise, I would tell you, most of our needs now are going to be better met by sharing our existing fleet vehicles rather than going out and adding more. And so that's where I think you see we've got 4 or 5 vehicles that are on here that are not public safety related, but we've got 8 new positions that we're bringing on board. And so again, we are truly trying to be thoughtful about that when we're making these requests.
We have, and again, I'm not talking about especially the police. What I'm talking about, like you said, eight people coming on board.
Mhm.
All 8 people need a vehicle.
So some do. So 3 of those.
That's, Josh,
Yeah.
you don't have to justify it, I'm just putting a thought in your mind. I think we need to look at more pool vehicles. At any given time that I come here, there's cars sitting in the parking lot. We're paying for those, and, we need rhetorical more. And I understand the 540 because we have a lease program. So I know why the debt's there. What I'm challenging you, staff, is to cut down the number of cars and to cut down the gas guzzlers, so to speak. Get the cheapest ones you can. And you know what? My sedan has a big trunk.
Yep.
Do you need an SUV? And
No.
That's a rhetorical question.
That's it.
One, that if we can cut this down, I think, I just cringe every time, we spend back.
Understood. And again,
All the cars.
I am happy to look through that with a critical eye, because if there's some way that we can accomplish the task through a cheaper and more effective means, I am all for it. Just know that we are definitely doing that analysis before making a recommendation to you. And as our fleet vehicle management becomes more sophisticated and becomes more involved, we will hopefully get to the point where we will have a comprehensive report on every vehicle from the time we purchase it, how it's been serviced, how it's been used, and to the point of can we keep it on the road longer through repairs rather than replacement. And we will feel confident that if we're coming to you, it's because it's time to get something else.
I'm going to throw one other idea at you and then it counts. If you took the 2 examples I talked to you, $500,000. There's your 2 mills for future capital projects and 1 mill to reduce the millage. There's 3 mills right there. And those things, which are going to affect 30 years from now, put some of that burden onto the people who are going to live here 30 years, and not the people who are all going to be dead right now.
Yes, sir.
Present company excluded.
Okay, it's kind of morbid.
Yeah, I know, well, my wife tells me, stop using that. Okay, so that's a different way of thinking of it, rather than that $500,000 is coming out of this year's taxpayers' pocket, and we're looking for ways to, get capital funded.
Yes, sir.
And at least from my perspective, lowering millage. There it is, right there.
Mayor, in partial, what you were saying, I do have an agreement, as I'm going down the new Station 82 build.
Yes, sir.
That's $3.5 million right there. It's almost a $5 million project spread over this year and next year. That's a 30-year project. That's gonna be there for a good long time. That's a project right there that we could finance 50% of it. And we as a council have to set a borrowing limit. If we have that, $8 million, we would have to know where we're going with that. And there's some other projects in here that we could possibly extend that out. Now, the other side of the coin is where the mayor says to reduce the millage. I go the other way, is not to reduce the millage and put that money back into savings, because maybe I'm the pessimist. I we see what the market has done, through our own city. We receive our, the monthly, housing matrix. We can see where that number has decreased exponentially the past few months. Will it come back? I sure hope it does, and we all hope it sure does. But in case it doesn't, we need to keep that reserve. And I don't even know, we don't even know if it's possible yet, because we don't know what we can borrow money for. What are we, if we're having to borrow money at 7%, no, it's not gonna be cost effective. But if we can, some of these projects that are gonna be usable by the people 30 years from now, when we're all still alive, we're still gonna be here. But let those future residents pay for that.
So, great segue. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Here's where, and I understand, and we went through this analysis when COVID hit, and we did what we could have. Here's the one thing that I would say to counter that statement, and it's a good one. I mean, we always have to be concerned. But this budget is a 12-month budget. It is not a 24-month budget. It's not a 36-month budget. All we have to project is the next year. And the next year is looking, I mean, the fees and everything, they're up. And the other thing in terms of long-term, debt and things like that, which you say two mils a year, which is fine, as long as, you take it out of what we're spending. But we also, if you're thinking about, what's the future gonna be like? The future's gonna be briskets from Buc-ee's and hopefully, exit 3. There's gonna be new commercial revenues 5 years from now that we don't have today. I mean, almost certainly. Yes, sir. But again, we only have to project the next 12 months. And the next 12 months, while there's some uncertainties, it doesn't look too bad.
I would agree with you. Typically, any impacts that we would see from a downturn or something like that, the impacts to us are delayed. Our tax bills and a lot of our other stuff are collected in arrears, so it's not until a year later that we are collecting for last year's thing. So if something happens now, it doesn't really impact us until next year when we go to collect it. So
And also, the one thing for certain, the grand total, even if our buildings came down, for certain, our total tax value of which we get our tax rate is going to be a lot higher than the year before.
that's the hope.
Well, listen, it's almost a certainty. If we only have 1,000 permits instead of 1,400, you're still going, our total taxable value is going to be up. And so I'm not concerned about the next 12 months. I'm concerned that, a downturn can happen. Sure. But not in the next 12 months.
If we had the ability to project further out into the future with some significant level of reliability, then we can make decisions today knowing what's going to happen in the future. I don't know that we're there yet. I don't know. We hope Buc-ee's.
You have a crystal ball, please, sir.
That's it. That's it. So, it's part art, part science, and we're trying to kind of use both. So, this is our projections, but also looking forward. I think we can expect the cost of services and the cost of projects to likely keep pace going forward. And so the longer it takes us to do something, the more expensive it's ultimately going to be. But the hope is that revenues are going to outpace the cost of construction, which would allow us to catch up at some point. But I don't know if or when that's going to become viable.
I have a question.
Yep.
What, if we borrow money today, what are you, Steve brought up a good point. What should we expect? What kind of percentage rate?
Perfect segue.
That's actually the next slide that we're
ready to get somewhere.
I'm your front man, I mean, you know,
Before we get to that, though, I do have one request, Josh, before we have a vote on this budget, could you take another hard look at this and see what projects in there would be workable to do the finance?
So also on the next slide. Yep.
Sam, ultimately, you tell me what projects you want to borrow for to get moving forward, and we will prepare an analysis for you that takes into account what the debt issuance would be, what the repayment options are, and we can bring that back to you.
Well, you,
The goal of this budget was to take all of our available resources that we have at hand and use those to the greatest extent possible. The only borrowing that we were proposing was primarily for vehicles, and really only because that's the mechanism that this body has used for the last couple of years to pay for that particular item.
well,
But otherwise, I wasn't recommending any debt until we have this conversation and you give me direction on what you feel comfortable with.
well, what I'm asking is, in your experience, I don't have that experience with municipal budgets, as I do have some, but nothing like what you and John have. I'm asking you all to give us an idea of what would be prudent, what you have seen in other municipalities, and what's worked and what hasn't worked for those. That's what I'm asking for.
Some level of borrowing at most local governments is normal. It really varies from place to place about how aggressive they get. Some places don't have the level of growth that we have, and so they typically are close to the cap at any given time. Other places like Hilton Head have paid off so much debt with the revenues that they have that they really don't have a whole lot of outstanding debt. But they're having a conversation right now about should they borrow $40 million to put new sand on the beach and keep money in the bank account earning interest, or should they use the cash that they have on hand and borrow a smaller amount? So it is a constant conversation. If I know what projects you want to get completed, we can prepare an analysis that says this is what it would take to do it. But without knowing anything beyond that, what we're recommending is what we think we can move forward with today, utilizing the existing funding sources that we have available.
Thank you. As much as I hate to use the phrase circle back, we're gonna circle back to, where we originally started, which was, when Mr. Gruber came on board, we had our, strategic retreat. It was identified, there was a number of projects that were identified that he was being encouraged to make some progress on. So staff got busy as we were starting with the budget, and we said, okay, if we were gonna do these projects, what would that look like? Now, Mr. Mayor, to your point, I think it's a little bit contrary to what you had said, which is when we buy vehicles, we don't buy them outright. We buy them typically on a 5-year lease because those vehicles are gonna be used for, as Josh said, 5, maybe 6 or 7 years as we take better and better care of them. So that's where we had the vehicles, Public Works pickup, the building services pickup, and the backhoe. And that was gonna be at 3.75% at 5 years, $200,000 a year in debt service for 5 years. Then we looked at the other projects. We could do a 10-year loan for the fire truck rebuild for $400,000, as well as the parking lots at EOC and PD. That was 10 years. That would have been $265,000 a year for 10 years. And then we get down into the bigger ones, which is the police headquarters, new city hall / city hall expansion, new fire station 82, and the municipal hub. We were to borrow that, that would have been a almost $44 million nut to cover. That would have been $2,700 over 30 years with a principal of $672 a year and $2 million just for that group of projects for just this upcoming year. So all told, we would be looking to borrow $46 million with $3.165 million in debt service for the next 5 years. And then if we borrowed nothing else from 31 to 30, keep hitting you in the head, Josh, sorry about that. 31 to 35, it'd be just about $3 million. And then for those last 20 years, it would be $2.7 million. So
we can't do that.
Yes, sir.
It's not realistic.
So
With an $8 million cap.
No.
well,
Yeah.
different kinds of debt as well. So, but once we did this, we had a very frank conversation of, well, man, we can't afford to do all we wanted to do. That's when we went back and sat with the department heads and Josh and we kicked around, how could we make some progress on some of the ones? Obviously, the fire station 82, that's a priority because we don't have much, we have about another, 18, 19 months, Steve, to get a new one?
It's 2026, so it's
And the 26, yeah.
something like that, yeah. Yeah.
So that's when we went back and we came up with a different funding stream. I think Josh has said, once you decide what projects you want to do, we can decide, we'll tell us, I don't want to borrow for that. I want to pay that out of pocket as we go. I want this you have debt for, I want to pay go that. This, I don't want you to pay, I don't want you to buy it up front. I want to finance this over the 5, the 10, the 20, whatever it ends up being, 30-year period. We had to basically take a stab at what we could come up with that would be workable. If we don't want to use all of the land acquisition money, we want to do something different. The combination of how we fund it is certainly for you guys to decide. We had to have something on paper to have this conversation. So if what we have is close, then we would be pretty proud. If not, we have some more work to do and we'll get that to you.
Yeah. And I would tell you that if we did want to explore some level of borrowing, I would want to loop in our bond counsel and our financial advisors to basically give us their recommendation in terms of options and maybe what the best way to go about borrowing might be.
And some of what you see on this schedule, we did talk to PFM about up front. So
I think what you just said is a very important point. The best formula to do it as opposed to ad hoc.
Yep.
When we come to borrowing, I like brick and mortar borrowing better than anything else that we have to have, because that's gonna be a substantial use, all the time. And that's what I said before. I was just looking at just a few of those items that if we could do those, it makes sense to me. It makes more sense, and I agree bringing in our bond counsel on this and the financial advisor to see that. I mean, all of a sudden now, we've just opened up a whole new can of worms here today. Because if we're going to do this, we have the ability to borrow it. We have to decide whether it's gonna be prudent to borrow or not. And that's a decision the council's gonna have to make.
yeah, so my thought is, what projects do you want to go forward with? And then what do you want to recommend or encourage that how we go about financing them or paying for them?
My recommendation is anything that, first of all, I would say we could easily double our, if we have 8 million, if we took 10%, would be 5, 10%, and use that to borrow on projects that have a 30 or more year usage. And that's why I picked out those two were, easy ones. $500,000, EOC improvements that could last for 30 years, right? And the Station 83 driveway. I mean, asphalt should have, a 30-year life. The one problem I have with that is that isn't there some talk about that station being moved?
Yeah.
So that one in particular, that request for the driveway repair is for an ongoing issue. There is a drainage pipe that runs basically diagonally under a length of that area. And we are seeing subsidence, which means maybe the joint has come loose. There is something that is leaking. It's causing there to be the beginnings of a sinkhole is essentially what it could turn into. I think I'm characterizing that correctly. Yeah. Okay. So it is on there as a maintenance issue, but you're seeing that I'm not recommending funding it primarily because of the discussion about looking at relocating the entire station. So to me, if it's not imminent in happening, and at this point, I don't know that it is, but it is something that will need to be addressed in the future, that's where I'm looking at that kind of investment in the facility versus how it's gonna be used. And until we know what the future use is going to be, I'm not recommending investing in the facility because we're gonna be relocating it. But with more information about what the nature of it is, you can make more informed decisions about whether that's appropriate or not appropriate.
Well, here's, add a different mindset to it. This is, we can't avoid it. We don't want our fire trucks to sink in a sinkhole. But if we issue debt, if and when we do change fire stations or move it, the proceeds could go towards paying off the debt.
Assuming that you sold it rather than repurposing it. If you repurposed it, you're still gonna have the same debt.
Yes.
But that's possible.
If you're repurposing it, again, you're using a 30-year building, and it justifies, the debt service. I just have personally a little anxiety about taking $3 million out of our general fund to do projects that are going to benefit the future. I think the future has to pay part of the bill.
I agree. Just out of curiosity, with such as Hilton Head and others, when they do things like this, how long do they finance that debt? 10 years, 20 years?
I would say 20 years is pretty good standard. It's not typically shorter than that, but you can go up to 30 years or possibly even longer. But 20 to 30, I would say, is a good estimate. Would you agree?
Generally, yes, I would agree with that, but it really depends on the underlying asset.
Most physical buildings, structures, things like that, I would say a 20 to 30 year repayment would not be unheard of.
The reason I say that is because if we continue on the growth that we have experienced, or even if it reduces, or we hope it increases, we're gonna need another station in a few years. And then we're gonna be right back.
Yep.
And I'm saying, that's what I'm saying, is if we keep money in reserve, we plan for that instead of, putting it all out there. I mean, and I agree with the mayor, the future has to pay for the future.
And you all have done actually a very good job of preparing for that, whether you, I think you did it intentionally, but.
Yeah, if it's a good job, it was intentional.
Absolutely. No, but
It was bad, it was somebody else.
Stayed up nights
The
thinking of that.
DA fees from a lot of these communities were and are going to go toward the development of those new stations. There's some difficulty in doing that with Station 82 because it's an existing facility that you're relocating. So it was analysis that we had Prina look into, because again, if we can pay for it out of that pot of money, I'd be telling you that's where we're gonna pay for it from. This particular station, it's not likely to be available, but the others are, and so we will be using the funds that are being paid from future residents to pay for those facilities. It's 82 that's the difficult one because of the sale of the existing property.
But with the growth this council has agreed to see happen in the next 5, 10 years, wherever it was, being the Morgan tract, car tract and all of that, we know that we're going to have that station. And, to me, it just makes sense to borrow money on the existing. We have that ability that we've basically freed up our funds.
Okay.
Like most people, I don't like to borrow money either, but sometimes you have to borrow money to get the results that benefit you.
Yeah. So with that information in mind, what I'd like to do is work with John to restructure this schedule a little bit. We can restructure it to show that debt issuance will be used for some more of these projects. And then from a timing standpoint, when we go to actually do a borrowing, I'd like to bring in the bond counsel and the financial advisors to talk about what is gonna be the best way to structure this. But in terms of looking at our physical properties and financing some of those, now again, I don't think we're talking about a new city hall. I don't think we're talking about the PD headquarters, because again, the price tag of those facilities is beyond, one, what we have the ability to borrow, if $8 million is our cap, and two, I don't know where the repayment of that debt service would come from without having to adjust millage. But for some of these other ones, we can rework these numbers to show that we're borrowing for facilities, we're paying cash for the vehicles and equipment so that we're not financing that. And then bring that back to you as part of, I wouldn't say that we'll have it to you by Wednesday, just because I want to be thoughtful in terms of making these changes, but prior to second reading of the budget, we can have an updated schedule to you, which again, doesn't mean that we're borrowing it tomorrow, it just means we're planning on borrowing it sometime after July 1st of this year.
And with the vehicle, and I remember when you brought the analysis of lease versus, that was a few years ago, and we started leasing and going into that debt. I would ask the question of, that policy came in part, if I recall, because of the low interest rates. Now you have a different interest rate schedule. So that analysis of what's better is one that you want to take. And also what I recall from our past analysis, we took on some debt at low interest rates, but also we took some debt, John, if I recall, that was at higher interest rates and switched them to lower notes.
Refinanced it.
Same thing we could do if we take a 4% note today, hopefully get down closer to what it was before, but we can take notes, and this is a question, that allow us to refinance lower.
So the figures that you're seeing here, I think, John, you had gotten from contacts that you have locally as far as general market rate figures, correct?
That's straight from PFM, who's our financial advisor.
That's it. So those are, I think, in the ballpark of what we would see. Typically, the cheapest form of borrowing is tax-exempt municipal debt. Because the people who hold that debt don't have to pay taxes on it, and therefore are willing to accept a lower interest rate in exchange for the tax-free nature of it. But that is a very organized public offering with a bond rating and a number of other things. We can look at doing that. I don't know that the level of debt that we're talking about makes sense for that, but when we start talking about financing a new city hall or a new PD headquarters or something like that, absolutely. And if we can roll in some of our other existing debt into one larger borrowing, that is, I think, probably the best option. But we can wait to hear that from the financial advisors when we reach that point.
I think putting off PD and City Hall is almost a necessity. However, I think what we do need to do before the next round of budgets is identify what we want to do. We're talking about, well, should we add on to that? Should we do this? I think if we have to start identify exactly what we can do so we can start planning for it. Right now, we don't have a firm strategy on where to put, these are the two biggest capital buildings that we want to do. So I think we need to start identifying where we're going to put it.
Absolutely. And we've not really looked at location. My understanding is there was a space needs analysis done that I think was shared with you all. But that basically says how much square footage each of those uses would likely need. So as long as you're good with that information, then we can take that and start overlaying that on various areas to see where a facility like that may make some sense.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but a big difference between this number and some other number is the acquisition of land.
That's what I was gonna say, none of these numbers include land acquisition.
So
This is all just construction costs.
Or if we decide to move this building to the back, we don't have to.
Correct, you don't need to add to it, but the city hall, the 9.5 million, that is just your construction costs. That does not take into account land.
Same with PD?
Correct, does not take into account land acquisition. That is just pure $600 per square foot multiplied by the square footage and the space needs analysis. Here's your number.
Just out of curiosity, when do you think 83 is planning on moving down the road?
Good question. I know that we're working on identifying that based upon the number of new homes that are built in that section, but Steve, do you have that at hand?
Basically, it's after the new one in Margaritaville goes up and after the one in the Morgan tract goes up. So it's going to be 5 plus 10 years before that thing actually moves.
Okay, so thinking about the time frame, it's gonna take 5 to 10 years to do that. How long do you think the sinkhole will stay away from the current 83?
It's a good question. It was definitely a topic of conversation when we were working through the budget proposal. I believe that we can make it at least through the next fiscal year before we make those repairs. But it is something that it will become more and more critical of a need going forward. I'm not sure if there's a way that we can look into it more without, because essentially what you gotta do is you gotta open trench it, pull it up, repair it, and then refill it, and that's it. And so you're just doing the repairs at that point in time. There's no way to do an exploratory analysis and see how much time you have left. Now, I know that they're probably gonna kick me for saying this, but if for some reason it became difficult to drive over that, we would have the ability to back into that station. Now, again, I know I'm not making any friends by saying that, but I'm just letting you know that should that happen, we wouldn't lose the functionality of the station while we would be working to repair it.
It's not the only sinkhole we have.
Well, I wouldn't wanna be penny wise and pound foolish.
No doubt.
You know, all of a sudden you think it's gonna last and the next thing you know, we have $1 million worth of repairs on a fire truck.
So I would tell you, with having this conversation about being more open to financing or borrowing for some of our construction costs, if that's something that's a concern to you that you would like us to build into this program for this year, when we go back and rework our numbers, we can incorporate that in and find a way to pay for it in this year's budget.
I think that's prudent.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question though, back to, we're back into recreation. Juju Hudson enhancement at $45,000, what is that?
Playground equipment? Yes, so that,
ADA playground
yeah,
equipment.
the ADA playground equipment.
Thank you, that's what I was wondering.
Yes, sir.
I don't wanna step out of line here, but we've talked about what we're gonna do as far as financing the projects. Are there any projects that the city manager's recommended that you would take off that list or add to that list? Or is this the list that you would have us work from?
I have no, personally, I don't have any, as I went through this, any problem with the, other than the cars, and, you know, all that money for cars, it always gives me the willies, but, the project list that's recommended here, I don't have a problem with it. I just have a problem with $3 million coming out of the general fund. So I would take with an $8 million, allowance that we can borrow, I would take, and I gave you 2 examples, any project that has a 30-year usage that we look to,
We're hearing you on that.
Absolutely. I just don't want us to look at, because even at $8 million, the debt service on that, is probably, rough math here, it was $265 a year for a 10-year for $2.5 million. So let's just say we did $4 million. We did half of what we have available. That is probably $500,000 a year in debt service for 10 years. If we stretch that out to 20 or 30, it probably comes down to 250, but that's still 2 to 4 mils.
I'm not suggesting.
I know, but that's what we gotta find how to fund it.
Just a couple of the projects, and, you know, no more than 10% of our available, less if possible.
That's it.
Just taking, you know, you take even 500,000, that's 500,000 we take out.
That's it. Now, that would be the money that we would need to pay the debt service in year one, but it's years 2, 3, 4 that we would have to figure out where it comes from. So I want to be cautious in terms of the amount of debt that we look at taking on until we know that we've got dedicated revenues to it. But in terms of reworking, keeping more in the general fund and borrowing some, but paying that debt service out of the general fund for that first year, that's what we'll look at doing.
So,
I'm not suggesting a whole lot of additional debt.
Understood.
okay, so at the last meeting, you straw polled. I mean, are y'all in agreement that this is the right projects, no more, no less? No substitutions?
With the exception of the driveway, the
Understood.
Station 83 driveway.
I think it's good.
So Station 83 driveway, are we gonna fix it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but that was on the list.
It was not recommended for funding, so it was identified, but I had not put it in my list just because I was gonna try to stretch it another year. But hear what you're saying, and what is it? Pound wise, penny foolish, something like, yeah.
Am I looking at the right line? Station 83 drive lane,
Yeah, it is.
255,000?
Yeah, thought I saw that.
Yeah.
So that isn't there.
Oh,
That isn't
Yeah,
here.
it is in this, for this
Yeah.
year.
Okay.
I don't know why I was trying to think that we weren't doing that.
Hey, write this down. We caught him.
I knew where we were going, I was already there.
I know, you were just checking to see if I'm paying attention.
Carla's
I
gonna
got it.
find ways to do it much cheaper.
Okay, that's your job, Jody.
Somebody crawls through the pipe and sees what the problem is.
Working on that.
Working on that.
So, can we, Mr. Boyle is asking us for a straw poll to, say that the list, the city manager recommended list is acceptable to council. How we pay general fund and other, you'll come back to us at the second reading. But the list itself is what you want direction on.
Yes.
Okay, so, any questions or comments from council before I take a straw poll on this? Okay, then, we start down the other end, and Bo, you for?
I gotta start moving.
Yeah. For or
No,
against?
I think you have the right list, and since you're responsible for getting this done, I think that's also important that this is the list that you want to have to get the things done, so I'm in support of it.
Steve?
I am in support of the list.
Valerie?
Yes, sir, supporting.
This is.
As long as I don't die before.
Hoover's list or Boyle's list?
I think we either float or sink together on this one.
Yeah.
The city list, then.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in favor of the list.
Awesome, okay.
Okay.
We had a couple other data points that we just wanted to go over again real quick, and I know the last time that we met on the 5th, we talked about reserving a little bit of time at the end of this workshop to kind of revisit the operational budget, make sure that if there are any questions that have come up between now and then, that we've answered those, but basically getting you all ready to discuss this matter on Wednesday, because it's gonna be on your agenda for first reading, and approval at that point. So John, you wanna cover just the handful of slides here we have at the end? I wanna go grab something else to drink, I'll be right back.
Okay. Driving the city manager to drink.
Could you wait, because you're driving me to the middle?
If the two of you aren't here, I guess there's no point in going on.
It'll go a lot smoother, probably.
Don't drink alone.
Go quick, get approval, John.
That's right. Just in review and follow-up to the operating budget meeting we had last week, we want to look at an updated fund balance projection and a revised operating budget. There was a change that impacted both of those that we made. Some further discussion on the rainy day fund and whether or not we may use the MCIP settlement funds. And then some more millage discussion, as you all would like to. And the first slide I have is, I don't know what happened. Okay. So the change that we made was we took the digital wall out of this year's budget as we think we've done some other things that are going to mitigate having to spend that. And I want to say it was roughly $94,000. And then what we needed to add was the office space for building safety. As I think everybody agreed, we need to get them out of the shop down at Public Works, give them some more professional working space. So that was $80,000 of the 94 that we added back, or that we added to the fiscal 26 budget. But it also caused us to have to add the 20% or 16,000 to the rainy day fund. So the rainy day fund, and with the rainy day fund and the cost being 96 against the 94, we had to bring down the unassigned fund balance just a little bit. So that's everything else on here, just updates that and shows that. The budget stabilization, you see that is $16,000 more than it was when we met a week ago. So that's what we're doing there. And again, the operating budget summary, we added to general government, we added the $20,000, which is where we put the revenue and expenses for the rainy day, so that it's in the budget should we ever need to spend it. Then we also added the $80,000 to building safety down here. So that was the changes coming out of that. And then that's what I have. So then it's a matter of what, if any, discussion do y'all want to have on the millage and you want to talk anything more about what we might do with rainy day, and then what, if anything, you want to do with the millage?
To recap, for the sake of Steve not being here, one proposal or one idea that was floated is to leave the rainy day at 20%, but when we get the MCIP settlement funds, to use that for the 291 to get the 1% down. The other option would be to, rather than just take a percentage, take a half a percentage, which would be roughly 150,000. So both of those things were discussed. And then, of course, the millage, Steve, for your edification, we took a straw poll. There were 2 for, 2 against, without your vote. So I think you want to take the rainy day fund discussion first?
Yes, sir.
Val, do you have anything to add from the last time?
No, sir, no.
So what's your preference, that we leave it at 20% and in anticipation of the MCIP funds, or take the 1% increase off the top?
What is the MCIP?
So that's the nickel plate settlement, the lawsuit about how to distribute the funds from that particular area, and they've been paid into the clerk of court. We are anticipating a settlement with Jasper County, hopefully sometime here in the next couple of weeks. We were just really awaiting upon them to update the numbers so that when we go to approve it, it is the last set of numbers that are most up to date, and we can go ahead and then get distributions going. our policy right now sets 20% essentially as a floor. We want to have at least 20% in our rainy day fund. This budget, before doing anything else, meets that requirement. We are at or above 20%. The goal that we talked about at our very first budget workshop would be to try to grow that number to 25% over time, but without looking at raising millage, without looking at taking away from other projects, just finding opportunities or being conservative with our budgeting to make sure that that number is being met. And so, at least for this upcoming year, what I had recommended was that out of those settlement proceeds, some portion of it go towards that effort to increase it from either 20% up to 21%, or something, higher than what it is today, but in lines with our goal of trying to reach that 25% over time.
Because we indicated we would like to increase, we didn't mandate.
No, it is not.
Now we have just thrown a new bunch into the mix with the projects that we're asking to see that we can finance. I'm comfortable with leaving it at 20% with the possibility of the MCIP funds coming in. But, we opened up a door that we discussed, that we know that we want to go there. And it's over the next few years. Doesn't mean we have to start it this year. This next year could be, we don't know what it's gonna be. Maybe we'll have a better handle 12 months from now. But for right now, if 20% is where we're at, I can live with that.
If I may, Mr. Mearsman, what you said was actually what the other four had in their straw poll, which was leave it at 20. When the MCIP money comes in, considering adding 1% up to the rainy day fund, which is roughly $290,000.
Explain again, John, the settlement of $555,000. That's money we're getting, or that's money we had put aside in anticipation, but we wouldn't have to use that.
So the nickel plate area, which for those of you that don't know, think about the Walmart and the surrounding, primarily commercial properties, but that area, that's generally the nickel plate area. There was a multi-county industrial park in place for that area before it was annexed into the city. And so there was a question about after it was annexed, does the millage go to the city? Does the millage go to the county? Or in this case, does it go to the bondholders for debt that was issued and backed by the revenues from that multi-county industrial park? And so that's what the lawsuit was about. And that has then been settled in terms of who gets paid what. While the case was pending, the tax revenues that were paid by those property owners were collected by Jasper County and were not distributed. They were deposited with the clerk of court, who's held on to them pending a resolution of the case. So it's money that was paid over the last several years. It's sitting in an account at the clerk of court's office. And once we reach a settlement with the county, the portion that's attributable to us would be released, and that's what we're estimating we would receive.
These are monies we didn't get, and just to
Correct.
clarify, the nickel plate was not annexed in the other areas that were part of nickel plate, which is the apartments at Courtney Bend and the other apartment next to it. The auto mall and Walmart, all that remains unincorporated.
Yes.
Okay, so that was not an issue because that never left. It was those,
The other portions.
that, I think it was about 2011, something like that. Those other portions that annexed in, and that was a loss.
If the funds come in and we take the 1%, the remaining funds, an excellent use of those would be to repair the driveway at 83.
You wouldn't have to take the debt.
Yeah.
And we're near we got the numbers from the county at next
I'm hopeful.
meeting, so this settlement, we're hoping we'll know by June 1st.
I'm not saying it's free money, but it's free money.
Hey,
It's
It's
just-
our money.
Because we found one.
And your identification, either to put it in the reserve or put it towards cap projects is absolutely the best way to do it because it's one-time money. It's not recurring.
Not recurring,
It's
correct.
one-time money, so you could take 291, increase it to 1%, and you still have $365,000 that you could, that would pay for.
Another project.
Very
$265,000
much so.
to add to another project, which helps on that end of it. I think that's an excellent, way to do it.
So was there interest accruing on that while it was sitting with the clerk of the court?
You know, I don't know. A lot of times they do put it into an interest-bearing account, but they, like us, are restricted in how they can invest it. So the interest income is usually a fraction of a percent because you can't invest it in something that can go down in value.
Correct, yeah.
You could, yeah, go ahead.
So they would have, if they did anything with the interest, they would have put it in LGIP. I've not spoken with the county treasurer, but I suspect they may not have, but I don't know for sure.
A lot of times the clerk of,
Yeah, I think your suspicions are valid.
How did you get the name Nickel Plate?
Who knows?
It's just an odd
That's
name.
before any of us,
It's an odd name.
we've got good feedback on that. Again, if we have the formal settlement and the numbers, we'll bring that before the budget's finalized. But either way, we're not looking at borrowing until sometime after July 1st, which I would absolutely hope that that's resolved by then, so.
So let's take, let's give Steve the benefit of having his vote in the straw poll. What we passed on the straw poll last week was that we would leave it at 20 and we would take the settlement funds to increase to 1%, as if and when that happens. Otherwise, it stays at 20.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay,
And
so.
then we'll address it next year as to what we're gonna do.
Right.
I would say it's an aspirational goal. If we can do it, let's do it. If we have other needs that are more pressing, then it gets pushed back in terms of priority.
But again, this is a one-year budget.
Yep.
Every decision can only be held for this year. We cannot vote on 2 years from now.
Yes, sir.
So I'm gonna take the same straw poll. I started with both, I'll start with you, Val. You, okay, that's 20%, leave it 20%. If we get the settlement, then we'll go to 21.
Yeah. That
Steve?
was what we
Yes.
decided, yeah.
Well,
Yes.
I'm a yes too. So that decision stays the same. We have one other conversation, and that's the millage. As I mentioned prior, it was a 2-2 to leave the millage as is. I think Bo and I were the nays, and John and Val were the yays.
It's the other way around, I think.
You and I voted to lower,
Yes.
and Val and John voted to leave it the same. And so, and of course, Steve wasn't here,
Have
so.
they come to their senses yet? Just couldn't resist.
Couldn't
It's
resist. A little levity, on a tough subject. So, let's open it up. Any thoughts from anyone? And Steve, you weren't here, so do you have anything?
Yes, dollar, put it in a dollar. What's the mill gonna cost the median price home? What's it gonna, what does that translate into a dollar amount?
$19 to $20, depending on which county.
19 to
Yeah,
$20.
the easiest way to do the math on that is for an owner-occupied home who gets taxed at a 4% special assessment ratio. For every mill, it is $4 per $100,000 of assessed value. So if you have a $500,000 home, 1 mill is $20.
So that answers question number one. Number two that I have, what is our limit if we had to increase millage? What are we allowed to increase?
Great question. So the way that the statutes work in 2006, the General Assembly adopted Act 388. That is the legislation that put the cap on what local governments can charge in terms of millage. You are limited to the prior year's population growth and CPI adjustment. So if your population growth is 1% and your CPI is 1%, you can raise your millage by 2% in that year. In addition to that, you can look back for up to 3 years for any millage that was authorized, but that you did not take. So for us, we can look back 3 years and look at what was the corresponding population increase and the corresponding CPI adjustment. And that gives you the amount that you could then increase your millage. And I know John's
got his finger going, he's got something to
as
add.
part of our presentation last week, he put together a full schedule.
If you'll go to the
on that.
workshop 2 slides, Daniel.
So we have that information. We can show it to you. I'm just kind of outlining the formula for how it is calculated. So for us, I'm trying to remember the number that you got to, but I think it was close to
61%.
yeah, so 60%. So our current millage is 95.
So Steve, your first question, I'm sorry, Mr. Mearsman, your first question was, what is, I don't know, I thought it was in here.
What is
It was definitely in there. We definitely
What is a
covered it.
mill? And my second part was what if an increase, what were we allowed to increase?
Yeah, and we have that here, that's
There you go.
this right here.
There we go.
So it's the sum of those 3 numbers.
That's
right
it.
there.
Yeah, so.
Are you kidding?
No.
So because you are the 3rd fastest growing community in the country, you're seeing numbers that are significantly higher than what other places would typically have available to them. But statutorily, that is what you're looking at. So if you can go up 60%, cumulatively by looking back for the last 3 years, in theory, you could raise millage 57 mills.
John, I'd like, if you could email me some of these slides,
This
Yeah.
is exactly what we got for the second workshop, the
Yeah,
one we had last
we'll
week.
send it to you.
please send them to me, yeah, so I didn't receive those. Just to look at that, that answers my question, because I've heard everything that we are limited to 1.5% or 1% or whatever it was.
For most jurisdictions, when you look at your population and your CPI, yeah, that's generally what you see. For us, because our population has been so significant and because inflation for the last couple of years has been above and beyond what, I mean, you look back in the 2013s, 1.6, 0.1, 1.2, 2. Those are much, much more common factors.
And that's the number for every government in the state. It's where you see us, is where everybody else is at 4.12 for the most recent year. We're at 20.21.
Good.
Because of the growth.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go to the next slide. No, the one that shows the cumulative, right there.
Okay.
Okay,
Val, and this was, I think, some of the information that you were looking for, the cumulative information on the mill value.
and again, I'm gonna reiterate what I said last week. As a result of our policy of regular reduction of millage, had we stayed with and not started this program years ago, just last year alone, our tax bill would have been $1,100 more than what it was. Okay? The policy of tax reduction, as our city has prospered, has resulted in significant, not $19 or $20, but significant cumulative effect. That's number one. Number two, as a result of the lost distribution, our tax bill has gone up substantially. And as I said, anybody who lives in the city, look at your tax bill. It went up because the rebates from loss have shrunk because the population has gone up faster than increase of the sales tax.
Sure.
Okay? For me, I went up $300 in a year. We're prospering.
Yeah.
And yet the taxes went up. In addition, our residents voted 2%, which is going to be a net 1% increase in the sales tax. So not only are we taxing our residents more because of loss, we're taxing them more because of they were wise enough to start taking care of their roads. So for that reason, I think that we need to also reward them by continuing this ongoing policy that we've had for multiple years of showing some tax reduction. And 1%, 1 mil is $138,000. And also, I think what you need to put up is, because the show is, we can, what are the projects that we can do just by holding them to a year without damaging any other objective in the budget?
Yep. So Mayor, to that point, and I'll just do my quick spiel from when I presented this last week. So I feel it's my obligation to you that coming out of that first budget workshop, you said, bring me a budget that keeps millage neutral and bring me a budget that reduces it 1 mil. I don't think it's fair to use the budget as a hostage negotiation tactic and say, if you don't pass it, I'm not going to be able to hire 2 police officers or 2 firefighters or whatever it is. So my pledge to you was, if we needed to reduce the budget by 1 mil, that I would propose to you the way that I think we could do it in the least painful way possible. So what you see here is that proposal, that if we needed to reduce the operating budget by 1 mil, those are the projects and those are the line items that I would ultimately reduce or put off to some other point in time.
And I think this illustrates another point that I made last week as well. In spite of having just since I've been mayor, over 30% decrease in the millage. In spite of all that, look at everything we've accomplished. A rec center, all the improvements to Richard Gray, covered basketball courts, all the things we've done, we have been able, through good stewardship, we have been able to do both. Reduce the taxes and take care of a lot of capital needs. I think that's something we should be proud of and continue, because we owe it. I'll use something that we've all said. We work first for our residents, and our residents should benefit from the prosperity that we've enjoyed, and not just, spend. We should give a benefit to our tax. Even with the 1% and the $20, our tax bill for every resident is going to be substantially higher. But at least we can say, hey, we lowered the mills. We can show we're working for our residents in terms of tax reduction. So that's the end of my little spiel.
And if I might add to what you're saying, Harry, it makes us attractive in terms of our tax policy, that people know we're increasing services, reducing. That's a good message.
Yeah.
Not everybody has that message. And if you don't have that message, you got a lot of, as they say, a lot of explaining to do. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It's attractive. And we haven't lowered the services. They're adequate and they're doing a good job.
And Bo, that was another point. I'm glad you brought that up, because another point that I made. All the new things all the new PDDs and all the new master plans that we've approved in the last couple of years are workforce housing. They're D.R. Horton homes, they're Farina homes, they're not the retirement homes. And so if we're going to those homes are gonna be attractive. If our tax bill is too high, it's going to prevent some of that entry-level homeowner from buying because of the taxes.
Cancel it out, right?
It cancels it out. Now, I wish Jasper County had taken the same approach years ago instead of building a stupid airport. But, you know, that's something we have to live with. At least we can say, hey, we have looked to the residents.
I stood back up just because you kind of got me thinking about something that I think it's good for us to understand at a very, like the 50,000 foot level. Residential growth is great. It brings new people here. Those people spend money. They get out into the community. They volunteer. They do all these wonderful things. From a local government standpoint, and more specifically from a budgeting standpoint for local government, residential growth typically doesn't pay for itself. The amount of revenue that you generate off of residential property owners versus the number of staff that you have to add, the number of new services and facilities that you're trying to provide, typically, again, 50,000 foot level, there's gonna be a lot of exceptions to that if you get lower than that, but at a very high level, that growth is great, but it doesn't necessarily pay for itself. It's the commercial growth that would really make a difference to us, and we know it's coming. It is out there. We just don't know how long it's going to take before we start seeing that activated. And so when you look at some of these projects like the PD headquarters or a new city hall or the White Hardy Boulevard redevelopment, again, I don't have numbers on that yet, so we haven't really talked about it, but it's gonna be, I suspect, a fairly expensive project when you start digging into land acquisition, building costs, and operational expenses and those kind of things. My recommendation to you in presenting this budget and the way that I've approached it is looking at finding that future capacity, which could come from several areas. Until we know which area it's coming from, my recommendation is to look at your existing revenues, which is primarily millage, and figure out a way that we can start saving up to it so that we can afford these larger projects. $3 to $5 million, we can handle that. We can internalize it, we can incorporate that, we can make those work. 15, 20, $25 million, I just don't know how in the future we're gonna pay for those projects if we don't start planning now. And so that's the only comment I wanted to make to you, that if next year our commercial growth comes online, it will be a blessing for many reasons. It'll generate more revenues for us, and it's gonna keep more of our dollars here locally that right now are going to Beaufort County, Chatham County, a number of other communities, because we don't have the businesses, the grocery stores, and the other things that people are looking for, so they're going to those communities, spending their money, and then coming back and living here. And so it will be an exponential effect once it comes online. I just don't know when that's gonna be.
Josh, there's a couple of points that I'd like to make. Number one, the growth, the population growth of Hardyville to date has been with retirees. And gated communities, we did not have to exponentially increase services that you would if it was a non-retirement.
It was the affordable housing part that prompted me.
That's number one. Number two, to your point, yes, we anticipate commercial, but we're anticipating commercial because we have rooftops. If that had not happened.
Absolutely, yeah, wouldn't even be on the table.
Talking about
Yeah.
commercial. So, you know, yes, there, you know, I've always heard, you know, residential doesn't pay for it. But in our case, it has. It's given us millions of dollars that we have been able to do all the things that we've done at the same time lower taxes.
And I think a lot of that is attributable to the fact that the communities that have come up offer a lot of amenities to the residents themselves within the community. So that's not something we've had to fulfill or provide, because they've gotten that from the communities themselves. It was when you start talking about the D.R. Horton developments, the affordable housing, the one that's gonna bring the families here, that's when it's, yeah, and they're gonna want parks, and they're gonna want libraries, and they're gonna want access to all these things that the older population, they make use of, but maybe not to the same degree. And that's That's why I felt I needed to come back up and say something
Can I
about that.
play devil's advocate here for a little bit? I understand where you're coming from, Mayor. But a couple of points is, we lower the mill, $20, and the tax bill still goes up. The residents that I listen to, they're not gonna care. They just see the bottom line. They see that bottom number, the number went up. What do you mean you lowered my taxes? Well, we lowered your millage, but my tax bill, tough thing to explain. That's where I sit with lowering the millage rate. The numbers I see there, is it possible? Yes. So we could lower the millage rate. To what Josh has just said, my community, my development that I live in, 4,000 people now. Those 4,000 people, they're not using Juju Hudson Park, they're not using the rec center, they're not using these other things that we have. And a lot of the growth in Sun City is there now. Yes, they have paid for all of this, but they're not using the services, and it's a hard sell to them to continue to do that. We know we're gonna have to have more parks, we know we're gonna have to have a lot more with these family houses that are gonna be coming. And we need to start saving the money for that, so we're not gonna be, having to say all of a sudden one year, we're gonna need to raise our millage 4%. I'm just not, I'm a fan of staying where we're at until we know where we're going. We don't know where we're going. We're projecting, retail growth. Well, the council projected retail growth 8 years ago when, Minto showed up, and there's nothing been built since. We're anticipating Buc-ee's, but that's 4 years away. There is gonna be growth, but it's not now. If we save the money and these things do come about, hey, that's great. We can reduce the millage 3-4 points in a year's time, but we don't know that. We're anticipating this retail growth. We don't know for sure it's gonna happen.
So your view is keeping it the same?
My view is keeping it the same. If things change next year, then we're only talking a 12-year budget. We've just said that. A year from now, things look different, we change that.
I have a question, just out of my curiosity. Between the time when we started reducing the budget until the very end year, how much money has been given back to the taxpayers?
Well, that's,
That's another one.
I can walk you through this. The first part of your question is, Mr. Davis and I, back with the 24, or a couple of years ago, started to look at the cumulative impact for a household. We don't have it going back further than that because we weren't tracking it. The other piece of that, though, is if you look at, are you asking about the other side, which is, since we started reducing,
Right.
we have, it's been 33,755, 33
That we've
million.
given back,
That
technically, well.
giving back revenue that the city forgone, however.
Yeah, it's just the math of it. So if you take 153 mills,
Yeah,
subtract the 95 mills that we're at now.
Right.
That's the amount that we've reduced over time.
right.
And you multiply that number by 138,000, which is the current today's value of a mill, it's $8 million. So
That
we,
we've given back.
well, that's it. That's what we would, at 153 mil, we would have collected $8 million more
This year.
this year than what we're currently projecting at 95 mills.
So, having said that, so that would have helped quite a bit, some of our projects that we have kind of sort of put on the back burner because we don't have the money.
There's definitely two sides to this coin. So
Okay.
that's one argument, is that
I'm curious.
if you hadn't reduced the millage, there would be more revenues there. The other side is you typically spend to your means. So the budget that I am presenting to you today spends every dollar of revenue that I think we're coming in because I think we have that many needs. So the counter argument is, yes, you would have had $8 million more, but you'd likely be just spending $8 million more in your budget than what you are today. So you're not really capturing that additional revenue, which is why my proposal to you is, if you keep the millage the same, that has to be then combined with budget discipline to take that money and put it into a capital projects fund so that you're not using it to supplement your operating budget. And that if you do both of those in conjunction with each other over a couple of years, that's, in my opinion, when you have then a different dynamic to have the conversation about borrowing for the larger projects.
So we wouldn't be in the pinch that we are in now.
Are we in a pinch?
I'm just asking.
I can't talk about a pinch, y'all have to have that discussion. But what I would say is, what we're doing here is, I think what Josh has been kind of emphasizing throughout the last two meetings is the budget discipline. Yes, you can say, well, you would spend up to your needs, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. But the other piece of that is, we're talking about going forward. Let's squirrel away a little bit of this. Let's squirrel away a little bit of that. If we had squirreled some of this away while we were doing a tax reduction, we might not be talking about how can we delay the sinkhole at 83. We might have more options, so.
If I can, the 8 million reduction there, that's based on 437,000 value of the home. I mean, as I'm looking down there, our reduction each year, is that line based on what our valuation of the city-wide was, or is that a total of
That's
today?
the 138,840 value of a mill times the difference, the 58 mil difference between 153 and 95.
Okay, but that,
So it's 58 times 138 gets you to the 8,028,000.
okay, but I mean, because, okay, the value of 1 mil is going to be based upon the total assessed valuation of the city of Hardyville, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that number is correct then. Thank you. We've seen a lot of change since 2016.
Absolutely. And, also, we gave you a methodology to start squirreling away by taking that $500,000 and putting it to debt issuance, as opposed to, and so instead of your two mills squirrel away next year, take that to debt, and now you can do it and reduce the mill. I think that, and again, I'm gonna stop, I've said all I'm gonna say. I am, to me, it's a personal principle. I'm not a tax and spend guy. Yeah, you can tax and you can spend another $8 million, but you know what? We did a pretty good job spending. Everybody got good raises over that time. We did a lot of positive things. And, I think as it's a principle with me. And, because when I came here, Argent Boulevard wasn't the conversation. It was the high taxes. And Bill, you'll remember that.
Absolutely.
And that was before Margaritaville came in, and, at every meeting, I didn't answer questions about Costco, Argent Boulevard. It was how high our taxes are. And like I said, I think the biggest culprit is north of us, but,
Well, and we've got the data points on that as well.
I can't do anything about that.
What is
So-
their name again?
Well,
We reduce, they increase.
Yeah, you said it at the outset. We all ultimately report to the citizens. That's at the end of the day, we do.
Exactly.
And
And that's the people I have to answer to.
Yep.
They're gonna ask me, they're not gonna, how come our taxes are up? Well, it's not my fault, I lowered the mills. Go to John Kemp, not me.
Yep.
To be able to say that we are reducing taxes, I think is responding to what our residents have always said since the day I got here. And the first thing when I ran for the council seat is economic development will lead to lower taxes. And it has. And that's the way it should be. The residents should benefit from the busy roads and all the things that have come. And that's a core principle of mine, and one I'll stay true to. And unless somebody else has something to say, we'll take a straw poll, and then you'll know how to bring the first reading.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Val, any other questions before we take a straw?
No, sir.
I went first last time, so I'm back to you, Pope. You get first.
Thank you, Wade.
My vote's the same as it was last time.
Reduce one.
Yes.
Steve?
Remain the same.
Val?
Remain the same.
Reduce. I think, given the fact that John's vote last time was to remain the same, so you should present the budget as is. I will, as a principal, vote no.
Understood.
And, you know, respect what everybody, whatever the council decides. But I will tell my residents I voted no for that reason. Yeah, just,
Well, thank you all for your feedback, your input. If there are any questions, I know this is a ton of material to go through. So if you're looking through any of these as you're looking through anything, if you see something and you got a question, or if you just want some more information, shoot me an email, give me a call, let me know. We'll be happy to give it to you either now, at first reading, or anytime thereafter. Just want you to feel comfortable with it.
If I can have what you've been putting up there just this last, I should have that Thursday so I can chew on it after that.
You'll have that before you get back to the house, sir.
Right. Then I gotta print all that. I'm still trying to figure out my new computer.
what kind of computers you get?
I don't know, James, what kind did I get?
Oh my gosh.
A square one.
Okay.
One that prints.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Please say
Aye.
aye. Aye. Okay, we're done.